for the last 3 months, I've been studying the impact of immigration on the condition of infrastructure in the United States. And actually, I have looked at, in some detail, at 15 different categories of infrastructure. And in alphabetical order: airports, border security, bridges, dams, the electric grid, hazardous waste disposal facilities, hospitals, mass transit, navigable waterways, parks, public schools, rail lines, solid waste disposal facilities, and water and sewer systems. And believe it or not, each one of these categories is impacted by immigration in a very well-defined way. And in my research, I identify the nexus between immigration and the deterioration in these facilities. And this report will be published in its entirety in the social contract next year. Well, I mean, what can you say? Immigration and infrastructure. It's sort of an odd couple. I mean, when we think of the fiscal impact of immigrants, we usually think in terms of their welfare recipiency, Medicaid, food stamps. I mean, we know that immigrants are poor, relatively poor. They receive those programs in greater percentages than natives, and yet they do not pay taxes sufficient to cover those programs. So there's certainly a deficit as regards to these social programs that immigrants are receiving. But what about infrastructure? I mean, what can you say? Infrastructure is sort of just there. You know, in economic parlance, there's a lot of fixed costs associated with infrastructure. Fixed cost means, you know, you have more people using a facility. It really doesn't increase the cost of that facility that much. Now, you know, if you have a water plant that is serving 50,000 residents, well, it can just as easily serve 55,000 residents. Now, you may have to build more pipes if it's, you know, if there's a new territory being developed and they need water. But you know, in general, there's no necessary relationship between the costs. At least we think, you know, if you don't think too heavily about it, there's no necessary relationship between increase in immigration and increase in costs that are related to infrastructure. I guess the best example in my mind, at least, is highways. I mean, you can have a highway that has a capacity of, let's say it has a capacity of 60,000 cars a day. Well, if you have 50,000 cars now using it, and you have 5,000 more cars that are used by immigrants, well, there's zero cost to society. Of course, the rate of depreciation is higher, there's more use, but in general, you don't have to expand the highway system commensurate to the increase in the population. At least that's the way it seems. There's obviously limits to that, how that calculation will break down. But some people go further than that, and they actually suggest that immigration reduces the fiscal burden that governments face in maintaining their infrastructure. Now, I want to quote to you from, this is an article from the LA Times of a few years ago. Quote, "A quarter of the population of California was born outside the United States. When immigrants drive a car, they travel the same roads as native-born Americans. When they turn on the tap, the water they drink draws on the same supplies. When they flip a light switch, the electricity comes from the same power grid." And this is continuing the quote. "For several decades, the impact of rapid overall population growth were moderated by the poverty of many new immigrants. Because most immigrants were newly arrived and poor, their average demands on the state's infrastructure were relatively low. This prolonged period of sluggish growth in infrastructure has lulled both planners and the public into complacency about the long-term needs." This writer continues, "The long-term softening of demand for infrastructure has been a little recognized effect of immigration. Had equal numbers of native-born migrants from Texas and Michigan replaced immigrants from Mexico and Korea, California's infrastructure demands would have surged much sooner and further, placing the state in worse jeopardy than it is today. There you have it. There you have it. I mean, what are we going to say like that? I mean, do you get what the guy's saying? He's saying that if we simply were to replace every native Californian with someone from Mexico or someone from Korea, the infrastructure crisis would be over in that state, basically. Hey, of course, what he doesn't say is how are we going to pay for it. Look, our infrastructure is trouble. Much of it was built shortly after World War II. It's outdated and it's been allowed to depreciate. More importantly, U.S. population is growing, requiring additional capacity even as it increases the rate of depreciation of existing infrastructure. I think you all know what the population future looks like. We're going to add almost 150 million people between today and the year 2050. 82% of that increase will be the result of immigrants arriving and their U.S.-born children. Now, if anyone thinks that that kind of population increase is not going to put strains on the existing infrastructure, they're simply not in touch with reality. As it is, we have to spend almost $1.6 trillion in order to bring the current infrastructure that we have up to speed. And this isn't my number. This is a number from the American Society for Civil Engineers. You can imagine what that, and they have not taken population growth into account when they arrived at that number. Now, I share the lunchtime speaker's a rather dire view of our ability to raise money in that magnitude for maintaining infrastructure. The supply, what I call the supply side solution to infrastructure, which is basically build, build, build. Well, that solution is dead. We simply don't have the wherewithal to spend that kind of money, $1.6 trillion, according to these engineers, as to what we need to close the gap between the supply and demand of infrastructure in this country. It has to be done by reducing the demand. It can't be done by increasing the supply, and that has to, immigration reform has to play a role in that, obviously, with 82% of the population in the future being driven by immigrants and their offspring. Now, this is a very rich topic. I just want to say one thing. There is some evidence that infrastructure is a draw for immigrants. If you look at the literature for undeveloped countries in Africa, countries that are dirt poor, there is some evidence that people travel from one country to another in search of clean water, let's say. It occurred to me, and I don't know why shouldn't we expect Mexicans to come to the United States in search of clean water? Are Mexican natives any less immune to Montezuma's revenge in Mexico than American tourists are when we go there? I doubt it. And I also submit that although the income gap between Mexico and the United States is profound, the infrastructure gap might be even wider. And I would love to be the person to develop some statistics showing that, yes, there is a profound gap between the United States and Mexico vis-a-vis our infrastructure, and yes, this is one of the reasons why illegal immigration is such a problem. Thank you.